Hello, humanoids. This is Ian T. Mello, and welcome to Squared Circle History, the podcast that chooses a promotion, focuses on a specific year, and gives a comprehensive and unbiased look at the best matches, moments, promos, and feuds. I encourage you to check out the actual footage of the wrestling events that are being discussed because, and I cannot stress this enough, the intent of this podcast is to make new fans of the product of the yesteryear. I'm a lifelong wrestling fan, and I love all of the history that there is of televised professional wrestling. So let's travel through wrestling history together here on Squared Circle History. Today we are going to focus on World Championship Wrestling in 1996, and what a year it was. To put you in the right time frame, let's go through what was happening in pop culture during the year of 1996. The year saw the release of memorable films such as Happy Gilmore, Swingers, Matilda, Ghosts of Mississippi, Jingle All the Way, Don't Be a Menace to South Central While Drinking Your Juice in the Hood, The Juror, Primal Fear, Twister, The Craft, Marvin's Room, A Time to Kill, Sleepers, Michael Collins, Independence Day, Romeo and Juliet, Jack, The Fan, Black Sheep, Kingpin, Joe's Apartment, Phenomenon, Waiting for Guffman, The Crow, City of Angels, Multiplicity, Tin Cup, The Cable Guy, Biodome, The Nutty Professor, Ed, The Stupids, Sergeant Bilko, Bulletproof, The Rock, The Great White Hype, Beavis and Butthead Do America, My Fellow Americans, Mars Attacks, Jerry Maguire, The First Wives Club, The English Patient, The People vs. Larry Flint, Sling Blade, and Space Jam. In record stores, we saw the release of albums such as Down on the Upside by Soundgarden, Anima by Tool, Evil Empire by Rage Against the Machine, All Eyes on Me by Tupac Shakur, Odelay by Beck, The Score by the Fugees, Title by Fiona Apple, Antichrist Superstar by Marilyn Manson, Iron Man by Ghostface Killah, Everything Must Go by Manic Street Preachers, Illadelph Half-Life by The Roots, White Light, White Heat, White Trash by Social Distortion, Tiny Music, Songs from the Vatican Gift Shop by Stone Temple Pilots, MTV Unplugged by Alice in Chains, Roots by Sepultura, Hell on Earth by Mobb Deep, Spice by the Spice Girls, Wild Mood Swings by The Cure, First Band on the Moon by the Cardigans, It Was Written by Nas, Reasonable Doubt by Jay-Z, Pinkerton by Weezer, ATLiens by Outkast, Murder Ballads by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, New Adventures in Hi-Fi by R.E.M., Stakes is High by De La Soul, No Code by Pearl Jam, The Great Southern Trendkill by Pantera, Secrets by Tony Braxton, Load by Metallica, Life is Peachy by Korn, Motel California by Ugly Kid Joe, October Rust by Typo Negative, Curb by Nickelback, and a self-titled album from Sublime. On television, we saw the debuts of shows such as Everybody Loves Raymond, Judge Judy, The Daily Show, Arthur, Access Hollywood, Seventh Heaven, The Steve Harvey Show, Blue's Clues, Doctor Who, Nash Bridges, Forensic Files, The Jamie Foxx Show, Third Rock from the Sun, Kenan and Kel, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, The Dana Carvey Show, Suddenly Susan, Hey Arnold, Arliss, Pacific Blue, and The Crocodile Hunter. In the news, rapper Tupac Shakur was a victim of a drive-by shooting, dying 6 days later at the age of 25. We also lost Carl Sagan, George Burns, Timothy Leary, and Ella Fitzgerald. Broadcasters worked with television and computer manufacturers to set a standard for HD TV, high-definition digital television. Mad cow disease caused a scare, with the outbreak occurring in Great Britain. United States President Bill Clinton appointed Madeleine Albright as the first female U.S. Secretary of State. The World Wrestling Federation was enjoying the success of their newest star, Stone Cold Steve Austin, who ushered in the Attitude Era with his legendary Austin 316 promo at that year's King of the Ring. But all this paled in comparison to what was happening in the WCW. With the Monday Night Wars in full swing, WCW took a commanding lead with the hottest angle not only in the history of the promotion, but arguably the history of the sport. The promotion was hotter than ever, firing on all cylinders thanks to an unexpected heel turn that created some of the most captivating television professional wrestling has ever seen. Join us on this trip as we journey back to World Championship Wrestling in 1996. The January 1st episode of Monday Nitro emanated from Atlanta, Georgia, and opened with Macho Man Randy Savage battling Arn Anderson. During the bout, Eric Bischoff revealed the Monday Night Raw results, saying the Smoking Guns won the Raw Bowl. Meanwhile, Anderson honed in on the wounded left arm of Savage until the referee got too close to the action and got knocked down. This allowed Anderson to pull out a foreign object, with Savage intercepting it and using it to bash Anderson in the face. Savage put the object in Anderson's tights and made the cover, with a wary referee making the 3 count. The show was headlined by the 2 most iconic names in the history of the game: WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and Hulk Hogan. Flair used underhanded tactics to gain the advantage and lock Hogan in the figure 4 leg lock. As Hogan reversed the hold, Jimmy Hart ran to ringside, cackling into his megaphone. This allowed Flair to ambush a distracted Hogan and regain the advantage. But the Hulkster fought back and covered Flair for a pinfall attempt. Jimmy Hart sprung onto the apron, distracting both Hogan and the referee Randy Anderson. This allowed the enforcer Arn Anderson to sneak in from behind and hit Hogan with a pair of brass knuckles. Hogan shook it off and fought the foreign object out of Anderson's hand. The referee turned around to see Hogan with the weapon in his hand and called for the bell. Fellow Four Horsemen members Brian Pillman and Chris Benoit attempted to ambush Hogan, but he fended them off with ease. Down the aisle came the Giant, who snuck up behind Hogan with a wooden stool. Macho Man Randy Savage ran in, snatching the stool out of the Giant's hand. Hogan swung the foreign object at the Giant, knocking him out of the ring. Kevin Sullivan and the Zodiac ran out to restrain the Giant, while Hogan stood tall with a stool-wielding Savage. Mean Gene interviewed the pair in the ring following the bout, with Hogan and Savage challenging Flair and Anderson to a tag team match for the following week. The match took place on the January 8th edition of Monday Nitro, with Hogan and Savage dominating the opening minutes of the bout. The Horsemen double-teamed Savage and gained the advantage until the Hulkster finally made the hot tag. While Savage and Flair brawled on the floor, Hogan hit a big boot and a leg drop on Anderson to score a pinfall victory. The bell barely rang as Pillman and Benoit rushed to ringside. They were cut off by Sullivan and the Zodiac, while the Giant stepped over the top rope and rammed together the heads of Hogan and Savage. The Giant followed it up by delivering a chokeslam to each man. The January 15th edition of Monday Nitro took place in Miami and began with the Total Package Lex Luger defeating the Macho Man Randy Savage with a torture rack. The Taskmaster grabbed Mean Gene by the jacket and dragged him to the ring with the entire Dungeon of Doom and 4 Horsemen in tow. They all stood in the ring, with Gene asking what in the world was going on. Arn Anderson was the voice of reason, initially scolding Brian Pillman for not dressing to the nines like the remaining Horsemen. He went on to announce a working relationship with the Dungeon of Doom. Sullivan praised Flair, calling him the greatest champion of all time. He went on to announce that he was loaning the Giant to Flair to face Hogan and Savage at the Clash of the Champions. The only gripe Sullivan had was with Pillman, who he claimed had no respect and wasn't Horseman material. Anderson decreed his respect for Sullivan, with Pillman interrupting and saying that the Horsemen weren't afraid of them. This caused Anderson to slap Pillman across the face, scolding him for getting out of line and assuring Sullivan there wouldn't be any more issues. Former ECW standouts The Public Enemy made their WCW debut, defeating the American Males. Following the match, Johnny Grunge and Rocco Rock stacked 2 tables on the floor and laid Buff Bagwell on top. Rocco flipped off the top rope, crashing onto Bagwell with the tables collapsing beneath them. Later that broadcast, Flair defended the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against the man called Sting. They continued their ongoing rivalry with another hard-hitting, back-and-forth bout. Just when it looked like Sting was closing in on a win, Jimmy Hart hopped onto the apron. This caused Lex Luger to come to ringside and confront Hart on the ring apron. As they argued, Sting whipped Flair into the corner and charged at him with a Stinger Splash. Luger got in the way and accidentally clobbered Sting with a foreign object. While Luger continued arguing with Hart, Flair applied the figure 4 leg lock on an unconscious Sting. The referee made the 3 count, awarding Flair the victory. Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage cleared the ring and assisted an injured Sting. Hogan and Savage attempted to talk sense into the Stinger, saying that Luger can't be trusted. Sting said he'd confront Luger himself. Meanwhile, tensions rose between Hogan and Savage over who would get an eventual title shot. The January 20th edition of WCW Saturday Night featured an interview with Ric Flair and Macho Man Randy Savage, both appearing from separate locations. They hyped their upcoming match on Monday Nitro, with Savage saying, "I'm more than TNT, I'm dynamite, and I'm gonna explode in your face." The Macho Man Randy Savage made a grand entrance on the January 22nd episode of Monday Nitro with a large line of women. He was quickly interrupted by Hulk Hogan, who congratulated Savage on his upcoming title match and asked for the first shot. Savage said, "What it is what it is," and then headed down the aisle for his title match against champion Nature Boy Ric Flair. On commentary, Eric Bischoff noted that amongst Savage's entourage was former longtime Flair manager, Woman. Flair made his entrance and confronted Woman, who slapped him across the face. This allowed Savage to batter Flair around ringside, bouncing him off of the steel guardrails. But the crafty Nature Boy battled back, leading to a tussle for the advantage. Jimmy Hart distracted the referee, while Arn Anderson hopped onto the apron with a pair of brass knuckles. He swung at Savage, but connected with Flair, just in time for the referee to turn around and see the interference. The action continued as Hogan battled Anderson on the floor. Savage soared through the air and onto Flair with a flying elbow drop and scored the pinfall victory to become the new WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Hogan celebrated with Savage, who called Mean Gene into the ring. Savage questioned Hogan as to why he was celebrating, since it wasn't him that just became the champion. He told Hogan not to embarrass himself, with Hogan saying he was the reason Savage was victorious. Savage told Hogan to get his red and yellow together and get in touch with Commissioner Nick Bockwinkel. The new champion said he wanted to face Hogan back at Caesar's Palace, and after he wins, he wants a handshake from the Hulkster. Hogan replied with an "oh yeah." Four Horsemen member Flying Brian Pillman battled Dean Malenko in a great back-and-forth encounter. Pillman's new loose cannon character was on full display, acting rabid and jaw-jacking with the fans. On commentary, Eric Bischoff said that Pillman was skating on thin ice. Malenko shifted the momentum and drilled Pillman with a brainbuster. Pillman fought back and planted Malenko with a swinging DDT, but failed to make the cover, instead playing mind games with the referee. This allowed Malenko to slam Pillman with a Tiger Bomb, but only got a 2 count. Malenko hit Pillman with a Gutbuster and applied an ankle lock, with Pillman making it to the ropes to break the hold. Despite Malenko's foot being stuck in the ropes, Pillman made the cover and scored the pinfall victory. WCW World Tag Team Champions Harlem Heat defended their titles against Sting and Lex Luger. The champions wore down Sting, keeping him in their corner. Booker T missed a Harlem hangover, allowing Sting to make the tag to Luger. Unfortunately, the referee was distracted by Jimmy Hart and forced Luger out of the ring. As Harlem Heat continued to double-team Sting, Jimmy Hart handed Luger a roll of quarters. Luger tagged in, clobbered Booker T with the foreign object, and scored the pinfall victory amongst the canvas of quarters. Luger and Sting were declared the new WCW World Tag Team Champions. The following night on the Clash of the Champions, Eric Bischoff interviewed the new Tag Team Champions. As Luger gloated about their win, the Road Warriors made their return, with Sting greeting them warmly. They asked for a title match, with Sting responding positively. Luger interrupted, saying that there were more deserving teams, citing that the Road Warriors were coming off of an injury. Hawk shouted back, saying Animal's back is too big for Luger's rack. Sting still liked the idea of the showdown. The loose cannon Brian Pillman battled Eddie Guerrero, leading to a controversial moment on live television. Persistent jeering from the crowd caused Pillman to go ballistic. He took his anger out on commentator Bobby the Brain Heenan, shoving him from behind. Startled, Heenan shouted profanity over the microphone, threw down his headset, and marched up the aisle. Heenan would later return to the booth to apologize as the match continued in the ring. Pillman went on to defeat Guerrero by hooking the tights. Eric Bischoff interviewed Pillman later in the broadcast, with the loose cannon vowing to earn the respect of Kevin Sullivan. The main event pit the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan against the Nature Boy Ric Flair and the Giant. Accompanying Savage and Hogan was football great Kevin Green, an entourage of women, and the debuting Miss Elizabeth. The Giant dominated Hogan in the opening minutes until the Hulkster battled back and slammed him. Flair and Savage eventually squabbled, while Hogan and the Giant continued their battle on the floor. Jimmy Hart distracted the referee and tossed Flair a pair of brass knuckles. Flair knocked out Savage and made the cover, scoring the pinfall victory while sneaking the foreign object into his tights. As Flair's music blared through the speakers, Hogan and Kevin Green fended off Brian Pillman and the Zodiac. Steven Regal battled Dusty Wolfe on the January 27th edition of Saturday Night. During the bout, a man attacked Regal to cause a disqualification, clobbering him repeatedly. The man looked into the camera and said, "I'm Fit Finlay, the Belfast Bruiser." He continued, saying, "This English pig will pay." The January 29th episode of Monday Nitro began with a battle between Nature Boy Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan. While Jimmy Hart accompanied Flair, Hogan was led to the ring by 4 women, one of which was Miss Elizabeth. Hart repeatedly interfered, allowing Flair to gain the advantage and wear down Hogan's knee. It wasn't long before Flair slapped on a figure 4 leg lock, only for Hogan to reverse it. Hogan hit a big boot and a leg drop on Flair, but Hart distracted referee Nick Patrick. Arn Anderson snuck into the ring wearing brass knuckles over his hand and swung at Hogan. Hogan blocked it and fought off Anderson, sending him to the floor. Hart restrained Elizabeth, with Anderson eventually stealing one of her shoes and passing it to Flair. The Nature Boy jammed the heel of the shoe into Hogan's eye and covered him for a pinfall victory. Hogan rolled to the floor, writhing in pain. Macho Man Randy Savage raced to ringside to check on the injured Hulkster. In the ring, Mean Gene interviewed the Taskmaster, who had Hugh Morris by his side. The Taskmaster was irate at Arn Anderson, mentioning a pact they'd made to keep peace between the 4 Horsemen and the Dungeon of Doom. Out came Anderson, with the loose cannon Brian Pillman by his side. The Taskmaster said that Pillman was out of control, with Anderson saying he'd take care of things. Anderson gave Pillman a stern talking to and said it was time for some tough love. Taking off his belt, Anderson prepared to whip Pillman, but was ambushed by the Taskmaster and Hugh Morris. The Taskmaster used Anderson's belt to whip Pillman repeatedly. Anderson battled back, causing the Taskmaster and Morris to retreat. An angry Anderson cut a promo on the Taskmaster, with Pillman saying he'd get them out of this mess. In the main event, the Macho Man Randy Savage defended the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against the Giant. With the referee rendered unconscious, the Nature Boy Ric Flair aided the Giant in pummeling Savage. Hulk Hogan raced to the ring with a steel chair, bashing the Giant repeatedly over the head. The rest of the Dungeon of Doom raced in, with Hogan fending them all off with the chair. An irate Flair raced to the broadcast booth, cutting a frantic promo to hype his upcoming steel cage match at Super Brawl against Savage. The February 5th episode of Monday Nitro began with Macho Man Randy Savage defending the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against the Crippler Chris Benoit. Savage was accompanied to the ring by Miss Elizabeth and Woman. The action was fierce, but Savage capitalized, connecting with a flying elbow drop. Nature Boy Ric Flair ran to ringside and grabbed hold of Elizabeth, using her as a shield from a furious Savage. As Savage inched towards Flair and a frightened Elizabeth, Woman jumped on the Macho Man's back and clawed at his eyes. Flair and Anderson stomped on Savage as Woman cackled in the aisle. Hulk Hogan cleared the ring with a steel chair and attended to a hurt Savage. Flair left with Woman on his arm, revealing they'd been working together all along. Hogan called Mean Gene into the ring and cut a scathing promo on Flair. Suddenly, Flair snuck back into the ring and knocked down Hogan with a right hand. Flair continued the beatdown, clawing at Hogan's forehead and opening a cut. The Giant entered the ring and clobbered Hogan across the back with a steel chair. Savage raced into the ring, grabbed the chair from the Giant, and cleaned house. Savage attended to a bloody Hogan who clenched at his wounded eye. Arn Anderson and the loose cannon Brian Pillman battled the Taskmaster and Hugh Morris in a hard-hitting bout. Things got out of control, with Anderson and the Taskmaster brawling up the aisle. A mysterious person reached through the curtain and smashed a broom over the back of Anderson's head. Back in the ring, Morris moonsaulted off the top rope onto Pillman. The Taskmaster then began to whip Pillman across the back with a leather belt. Pillman managed to escape, retreating up the aisle with Anderson. In the main event, Sting and Lex Luger defended the WCW World Tag Team Championships against the Road Warriors. The building temporarily lost power, but the action continued. Things got out of control, with Jimmy Hart handing Luger a foreign object, which he used to knock Animal unconscious. Luger made the cover and scored the pinfall victory, but Sting was less than pleased. Mean Gene interviewed the Road Warriors, who demanded a rematch at Super Brawl. The February 10th edition of WCW Saturday Night saw Mean Gene interview the Nature Boy Ric Flair. With Woman by his side, Flair dropped to his knees and said, "Woman is back, and she's on top of the world." Flair went on to brag about his recent success and hyped his upcoming steel cage match with Macho Man Randy Savage. In the main event, Randy Savage battled Chris Benoit. The match ended in a disqualification with Ric Flair and Arn Anderson brutally attacking Savage at ringside. Super Brawl VI took place on February 11th, live on pay-per-view from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and began with the Nasty Boys and the Public Enemy brutalizing one another in a wild street fight. They bashed one another carelessly with reckless chair shots to the head. Brian Knobbs body slammed Rocco Rock off the ring apron and threw a table at ringside. Jerry Saggs introduced a trash can, mangling the lid over the head of Johnny Grunge. In the ring, Saggs hit Grunge with a pile driver onto the trash can, crushing it. Meanwhile, Rocco and Knobbs battled to a merchandise stand, destroying it in no time. All four battled it out in brutal fashion until Grunge laid Knobbs onto one of the tables at the merchandise stand. Rocco climbed onto a balcony high above, somersaulting off of it. Knobbs moved, with Rocco crashing through the table below. Burying Rocco under the remnants of the table, Knobbs made the cover and scored the pinfall victory. The loose cannon Brian Pillman battled the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan in a respect match, ending in controversial fashion. In order to win, you'd have to make your opponent say into a microphone that they respect you. Additionally, the two would be bound together by a leather strap. After a mere minute of intense brawling, Pillman grabbed the microphone from the referee and said, "I respect you, Booker Man." This was referencing the fact that in reality, Sullivan was the booker, or the matchmaker, in WCW. Pillman walked up the aisle, flipping off the fans. He'd be released from his WCW contract shortly after. Arn Anderson marched to the ring in regular clothes, strapped himself in, and battled the Taskmaster in a brutal strap match. The Nature Boy Ric Flair interfered, saying that they weren't proving anything by beating one another up. Instead, Flair said that they need to focus on taking out Hulk Hogan. Anderson said he'd work with the devil himself to get his hands on Hogan again. After defeating Harlem Heat earlier in the evening, Sting and Lex Luger defended the WCW World Tag Team Championships against the Road Warriors. At the start, Luger was reluctant to get in the ring until Hawk and Animal took off their spikes. Once things kicked off, the Road Warriors unleashed a brutal beatdown on Sting, with Luger avoiding the tag. In the end, both teams battled outside the ring, with the referee counting them out. The WCW World Heavyweight Champion, Macho Man Randy Savage, defended his title against the Nature Boy Ric Flair in a steel cage match. Woman accompanied Flair to the ring, while Miss Elizabeth accompanied Savage. All order was lost, as Flair deliberately punched out referee Randy Eller in the opening minutes. Both men traded momentum, bruising each other with clubbing blows. Savage scaled the cage and leapt off with a double axe handle, but was met with a shot to the gut from Flair. The Nature Boy dragged Savage to the center of the ring and locked in the figure 4 leg lock. Still, Savage made it to the ropes, with the referee having to pull at Flair's hair to break the hold. Savage fought back, bouncing Flair's face off the cage walls and grating his forehead in the mesh. Shortly after, Savage covered a tired Flair, with the count so close to 3 that the timekeeper rang the bell as Flair kicked out at the last moment. Desperate, Flair made multiple attempts to escape, with Savage pulling him back in by the tights. Woman attempted to change the momentum, throwing powder at Savage, who dodged the attempt. Shockingly, Elizabeth opened the cage door and handed Flair her shoe. Savage rolled up Flair, with the Nature Boy kicking out and clobbering Savage with the shoe. Flair scored a pinfall victory in the center of the ring to become a 13-time World Heavyweight Champion. Hulk Hogan raced to the ring with a steel chair, running off Flair and Anderson. Despite this, Flair not only left with Woman, but also a smiling Elizabeth. In the main event, Hulk Hogan faced the Giant in a steel cage match, with the Hulkster choking and biting the Giant in the early minutes. The tides turned when Hogan attempted a body slam, but injured his back. This allowed the Giant to pummel Hogan, choking him with his own shirt and bouncing him off the walls of the cage. The Giant planted Hogan with a chokeslam, with the Hulkster shaking it off and hulking up. Hogan bounced the Giant off the cage walls, busting him open. A big boot to the face followed, with Hogan then body slamming the Giant and hitting 3 big leg drops. As Hogan climbed the cage, the Giant shot to his feet and climbed the ropes to fight with the Hulkster at the top of the cage. Hogan won the exchange, punching the Giant in the face to send him falling backwards and crashing to the canvas below. This allowed Hogan to climb over the cage to win the match, but was immediately waffled by the Taskmaster with a steel chair. Hogan chased the Taskmaster into the cage, but the Giant was there to protect his stablemate. The Faces of Fear ran in, with Hogan bashing everyone over the head with a steel chair. The Shark, Hugh Morris, the One-Man Gang, and the Zodiac all entered the cage, but Hogan fought everyone off. Out came the Giant Loch Ness, with the Shark holding him back. As the Dungeon of Doom retreated, Hogan celebrated and posed in the ring to end the broadcast. The following night on Monday Nitro, Miss Elizabeth and Woman wheeled a hospital bed out of the entrance. Mean Gene approached, with Flair popping out of the bed and onto his feet. Flair bragged about winning the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, as well as having 2 ladies by his side. Elizabeth spoke up, complaining about having to be in the shadow of the Macho Man for 7 years. Not only did she take half of everything from Savage in the divorce, but she bragged that she cost him the World Heavyweight Championship. The main event pit Hulk Hogan against Arn Anderson. Despite having his left eye taped up, Hogan pummeled Anderson both in the ring and on the floor. Nature Boy Ric Flair and Miss Elizabeth made their way to ringside. This didn't faze Hogan, who slapped a figure 4 leg lock on Anderson. Flair interfered, only for Hogan to roll him up while still clenching the legs of Anderson. Woman hopped onto the apron with powder in hand, tossing it into the eyes of Hogan. Elizabeth handed Anderson her shoe, which the enforcer used to clobber Hogan. In the biggest win of his career, Anderson scored a pinfall victory over Hogan. Following the match, Hogan attacked Flair and Anderson. Macho Man Randy Savage ran to ringside, wreaking havoc and clobbering Flair over the head with a chair. The February 19th edition of Monday Nitro began with Hulk Hogan getting his rematch against Arn Anderson, who had Woman in his corner. Hogan got his revenge, dominating the match and putting Anderson in a figure 4. The Taskmaster ran in, with Macho Man Randy Savage tackling him to the mat. This caused the referee to call for the bell, with Anderson declared the winner by disqualification. In the main event, Macho Man Randy Savage received his rematch against the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. The two battled around ringside, scratching and clawing their way back into the ring. Exhausted, the two battled back and forth, trading near falls. At a moment's notice, Miss Elizabeth hopped onto the apron, distracting both Savage and the referee. Woman hurled her shoe into the ring to Flair, only for Savage to intercept it and knock out the Nature Boy. Chaos ensued, with members of the Four Horsemen, the Dungeon of Doom, and Hulk Hogan running to ringside. Arn Anderson snuck in and nailed Savage with a lethal DDT, allowing Flair to cover the Macho Man and pick up the pinfall victory. Hogan rolled into the ring, only to be pummeled by Flair, Anderson, and the Taskmaster. The former Zodiac, now wearing tassels and fringe tights, ran into the ring to make the save. The brawling made its way to the broadcast booth, with Bobby the Brain Heenan scurrying away. Hogan introduced the former Zodiac as the Booty Man. The February 26th episode of Monday Nitro saw Eric Bischoff reveal the Monday Night Raw results on commentary in controversial fashion. This was all during the entrance of Big Bubba Rogers, who was in action against Sting. A hard-hitting battle ensued that even saw Sting pile-drive Bubba on top of his head. In the end, Sting dove off the top rope with a high cross body and pinned Bubba for the victory. In the main event, Macho Man Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, and the Booty Man battled Nature Boy Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and the Taskmaster. Both Woman and Miss Elizabeth interfered, but there was no stopping Hogan. The Hulkster hit Anderson with a big leg drop and scored the pinfall victory. Immediately after the bell, Flair struck Hogan from behind with a high knee. Elizabeth handcuffed an unconscious Hogan to the top rope. Flair began to whip Hogan until Savage ran everyone off. Johnny B. Bad defended the WCW World Television Championship against the Total Package Lex Luger on the March 9th edition of WCW Saturday Night. Jimmy Hart distracted the referee while DDP hit Johnny B. Bad with a diamond cutter on the floor. DDP threw Bad to Luger, who scored a pinfall victory to become the new television champion. The March 11th edition of Monday Nitro saw the Steiner brothers make their return, riding their motorcycles down the aisle. With the Nasty Boys conveniently knocked out backstage, the Steiners went on to face the Road Warriors in a battle for tag team supremacy. The action was intense, with the crowd roaring for every move in a match that exceeded expectations. The Road Warriors hit a big doomsday device on Rick Steiner, with Scott making the save. Desperate times called for desperate measures, as Animal clobbered Rick with a spiked knee pad. Hawk covered Rick to score a pinfall victory in an exciting match. Mean Gene interviewed the Steiners, with Scott calling the Road Warriors a disgrace. The WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Kevin Sullivan battled Hulk Hogan, Macho Man Randy Savage, and the Booty Man in a lumberjack match. The Giant and Loch Ness brawled with one another, with the two largest lumberjacks battling to the back. The action continued, with the six whipping one another with leather straps, while the lumberjacks seethed on the floor. Flair attempted to escape, with the Road Warriors carrying him back to the ring. The lumberjacks pulled Hogan to the floor, whipping him, with the Hulkster fending them off, only to return to the chaos inside the ring. Hogan managed to hit Flair with a big leg drop and score the pinfall victory in a chaotic encounter. Following the bout, Mean Gene interviewed Flair, Anderson, and Sullivan. They hyped the big cage match at Uncensored, featuring a plethora of villains battling the team of Hogan and Savage. The unpredictable free agent Brian Pillman caused a scene, purchasing a ticket, standing in the crowd, and raucously promoting his new 1-900 number. While the Giant battled Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Pillman attempted to hop the guardrail. Security escorted Pillman away as Eric Bischoff threw down his headset and rushed to the scene. The March 18th edition of Monday Nitro saw Public Enemy in action against the Steiner brothers in a hard-hitting battle. Rocco Rock got overzealous, attempting to put Rick Steiner through a table. Rick moved, with Rock crashing through the table. The Steiners took care of Johnny Grunge and scored the pinfall victory. Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage battled the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair and the Taskmaster in a wild bout that Steve McMichael described on commentary as a whirling dervish. Chaos ensued, requiring a split screen to keep up with all the madness. Arn Anderson interfered, with Hogan chasing after him. Brian Pillman again hopped the guardrail, with Hogan fighting him off. Pillman clobbered Savage with a chair, leading to a wild brawl that saw the Macho Man legitimately bloodied. Jimmy Hart let out the debuting Z Gangsta and the Ultimate Solution, two behemoths that caused Hogan, Savage, and the Booty Man to retreat. In the background, Flair said, "Hogan, do something about it." Uncensored took place on March 24th and saw Lord Steven Regal battle the Belfast Bruiser in a hard-hitting bout. The two bruised one another with wild punches and jaw-jacking uppercuts. Things got uglier, with the Bruiser bloodying Regal with vicious elbows. They battled up the aisle, with Regal bouncing the Bruiser off the Doomsday Cage. As Bruiser regained the advantage, the Blue Bloods attacked him from behind to cause a disqualification. The fists continued to fly all the way up the aisle, with the feud far from finished. Since Lex Luger bailed on Sting, Booker T filled in to battle the Road Warriors in a Chicago street fight. The brawling ensued around ringside, requiring a split screen for the majority of the match. It was a slugfest, with Sting introducing a chair to cause more mayhem. Hawk dragged Sting into the crowd, clobbering him with rights and lefts. All four combatants were exhausted, with the bout clocking in over a half hour. Despite exhaustion, all four fought tooth and nail, with chair shots as wild as the brawling. Sting introduced two brooms, clobbering his opponents. Animal snatched a broom, breaking it in two and clobbering Sting and Booker. Booker T walked off, with Animal catching up with him in the back. Both Stevie Ray and Lex Luger ambushed Animal and taped him to a steel post. Sting and Hawk continued brawling at ringside, where Booker T shortly joined them. Hawk dodged a Harlem hangover, but fell a steel chair to the back of the head, courtesy of Stevie Ray. Booker T scored the pinfall victory, with Animal screaming backstage, still taped to the post. The main event featured the Doomsday Cage match, a three-tiered cage that saw Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage facing the Alliance to End Hulkamania, consisting of the Nature Boy Ric Flair, the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan, the Total Package Lex Luger, the Enforcer Arn Anderson, Ming, the Barbarian, Z Gangsta, and the Ultimate Solution. Hogan and Savage began at the top of the cage, battling Flair and Anderson. This was no easy feat, with the Mega Powers taking a beating in only the first of 3 tiers. Hogan and Savage threw powder in the eyes of Flair and Anderson, and then escaped into the second cage. Luger, Sullivan, Ming, and the Barbarian were waiting, fresh, and ready to punish the Mega Powers. Hogan locked the Faces of Fear in a tier, with Savage brawling with Luger. Hogan battled Sullivan out onto a scaffold, with Sullivan hanging on for dear life. They brawled down the scaffold and to the floor. Luger followed, with Savage in tow. Hogan led Sullivan to ringside and beat him down with Michael Buffer's microphone. Meanwhile, the Faces of Fear broke free, while Luger bounced Savage off the steel of the scaffolding. Hogan made the save, attacking Luger with a bucket. Sullivan ripped a piece of wood off the scaffolding and brought it into the ring. Savage followed with another board, attacking Sullivan. Z Gangsta and the Ultimate Solution made their way to the ring and dragged the Mega Powers back to the bottom tier of the Doomsday Cage. Hogan came face to face with Z Gangsta, who choked him to the ground. The Horsemen ran into the cage to further inflict punishment on the Mega Powers. The Booty Man snuck Hogan a frying pan and Savage powder to improve their odds. Luger charged in with a weighted glove, knocking Flair out. Savage covered Flair for a pinfall victory before escaping out of the cage with Hogan. The night after on Monday Nitro, Macho Man Randy Savage defeated the Belfast Bruiser with a flying elbow drop in a hard-hitting bout. Following the commercial break, Mean Gene interviewed the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair. At the stage, Miss Elizabeth and Woman stood by the champion's side. Despite having a title defense against the Giant in the main event, Flair showed no signs of nervousness. The match closed the show, with Elizabeth and Woman accompanying Flair, handing out handfuls of Savage's money to the crowd during their entrance. Wrestlers had to restrain Savage back at the entrance, with Woman getting in a cheap shot. Flair talked a big game, getting in the Giant's face. The Giant shoved Flair away and began his dominance in the match. Flair attempted to escape up the aisle, but the Giant picked him up with one hand and carried him back to the ring. The Giant launched himself off the top rope with a big splash, but Flair rolled out of the way. Woman threw Flair a strand of piano wire, which he used to choke the Giant. The Nature Boy followed it up by striking the Giant with a low blow behind the back of referee Randy Anderson. The Giant regained his bearings, hitting Flair with a chokeslam. Elizabeth and Woman ran in to distract the referee, while Arn Anderson ran in from behind with a chair. Anderson waffled the Giant across the back with the chair, with Kevin Sullivan snatching the chair out of his hand. The Giant turned around to see the proverbial smoking gun in the hands of the Taskmaster. The Giant grabbed Sullivan by the throat and hit him with a chokeslam. Anderson received a chokeslam as well, as the referee called the match off. Jimmy Hart ran around like a maniac, attempting to maintain order. The Giant walked off on his own. The April 1st episode of Monday Nitro saw Hulk Hogan and the Booty Man, with his new manager, the Booty Babe, Kimberly, take on Arn Anderson and the Taskmaster, who had Miss Elizabeth and Woman in their corner. In the end, the Taskmaster got a hold of Woman's shoe. Seeing this, Kimberly handed her shoe to Hogan, which he used to bash the Taskmaster over the head and score the pinfall victory. During the celebration, Anderson ambushed the Booty Man and quickly retreated with Woman and Elizabeth. On the April 22nd Monday Nitro, Eric Bischoff revealed spoilers for the pre-taped episode of WWF Monday Night Raw. He boasted that WCW was the only live wrestling show on Monday nights. The main event pit WCW World Tag Team Champions Sting and Lex Luger against the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and the Giant. Per the stipulation, every title was on the line, including Lex Luger's television championship, meaning anybody that got pinned would lose their gold. Macho Man Randy Savage rushed to the ring during Flair's entrance, but was held back by security, arrested, and escorted out of the arena. The tag team champions dominated early on, working smoothly. The tides turned once Sting lunged at Flair on the floor with a Stinger Splash. Flair moved, sending Sting crashing against a steel guardrail, ribs first. The Giant grabbed Luger by the throat, with Sting repeatedly jumping at the Giant's knee. The Giant finally let go, while Woman handed Flair a cup of hot coffee. Flair threw the coffee at Sting, who moved, with the Giant getting scorched. As the Giant flailed in pain, the referee called for a disqualification. Flair dropped to his knees, begging for the Giant's forgiveness, but eventually scurried away as the Giant fumed. The stage was set for a confrontation between the two the following week. Lord Steven Regal battled the Belfast Bruiser on the April 27th edition of WCW Saturday Night. They battled ferociously, throwing haymakers at one another. The match ended in a disqualification after the two waffled one another with a chair on the floor. As officials rushed to the scene, the Bruiser drilled Regal with a tombstone piledriver on the floor. The April 29th edition of Monday Nitro featured the legendary parking lot brawl between Steven Regal and the Belfast Bruiser. Both men clobbered one another, surrounded by vehicles. The Bruiser threw a kick at Regal, dodging it and sending the Bruiser's leg through a glass window. Regal raked the Bruiser's face on the concrete, with the Bruiser recovering shortly after to beat down Regal with a car bumper. Regal slammed the Bruiser on the hood of a car and dropped an elbow on him, with the Bruiser quick to recover, choking Regal with a seatbelt. Regal whipped the Bruiser into an open car door, smashing through the window. On commentary, Eric Bischoff urged the cameraman to go wide if the action got too out of hand. Regal dragged Bruiser onto the hood of a car and set him up for a piledriver. Bruiser reversed it, backdropping Regal onto the roof of the car. The brawling continued on the roof, where Regal successfully hit a piledriver on Bruiser. The two slid down onto the hood, where Regal scored the pinfall victory. When it was all over, Bobby Heenan on commentary said, "Wait a second, that's my rental car." The first vignette aired for a brand new character named Glacier. The phrase "blood runs cold" was emphasized throughout the run of the build-up. The main event saw Nature Boy Ric Flair defend the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against the Giant. While Flair made his way down the aisle with Elizabeth and Woman, he spotted Deborah McMichael in the crowd. Commentator Steve Mongo McMichael wasn't too pleased to see Flair making a pass at his wife. When the bell rang, the size difference became too much for Flair. That is, until Woman distracted the referee, and Flair brought the Giant to his knees with a low blow. Even on his knees, the Giant shoved Flair away. Flair slipped on a pair of brass knuckles and clobbered the Giant. The Nature Boy applied the figure 4, but the Giant wrapped his hand around the champion's throat. The Giant hoisted Flair high in the air and hit a big chokeslam, capitalizing with a pinfall victory to become the new WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Jimmy Hart was ecstatic as his client celebrated his championship win. On the April 29th edition of WCW Prime, a vignette aired featuring Diamond Dallas Page, who was now homeless and living on the street. The May 6th edition of Monday Nitro featured a match between Dean Malenko and Jushin Thunder Liger. This was cruiserweight action at its finest. Liger soared with tremendous high-risk moves and innovative offense. Malenko responded with a gutbuster off the second rope. He followed it up with a Tiger Bomb to score a pinfall victory over Liger. On the May 6th episode of WCW Prime, The same videographer from last week showed more footage of a homeless Diamond Dallas Page. He was outside of an arena scalping tickets to the rodeo. It wound up that DDP was selling tickets for the event the night prior. On the May 13th episode of Monday Nitro, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion The Giant defended his title against the Total Package Lex Luger. While Luger displayed incredible power, the Giant managed to beat the Total Package. Nature Boy Ric Flair sat at a table at ringside with Woman and Miss Elizabeth. The Giant cleared the table and chokeslammed Luger through it. Jimmy Hart had to jump on the Giant's back and shout in his ear to end the carnage. WCW officials and Sting attended to a wounded Luger. Mean Gene attempted to get a word, but Sting shouted at him to leave. The May 13th episode of WCW Prime aired footage of Diamond Dallas Page cleaning car windows in the rain and demanding money. Later, footage was shown of DDP entering a limo and leaving the street corner. Slamboree took place on May 19th and featured the Battle Bowl tournament. As luck would have it, the first round saw Nature Boy Ric Flair and the Macho Man Randy Savage on the same team, opposing Arn Anderson and Eddie Guerrero. Flair stalled making his entrance, which fired up Savage. Anderson attacked Savage from behind before the bell, with the Horsemen showing their true intentions. Savage fought back with rage, but Anderson cut him off with a spinebuster. Despite Savage being his partner, Flair put the boots to him. Guerrero cut Flair off, showing lots of fire. Savage attacked Flair while Anderson took out Guerrero with a DDT. Flair got the cheap victory on Guerrero and then joined Anderson in laying in a beatdown on Savage. Elizabeth slapped Savage across the face before Anderson delivered a brutal DDT on the floor. The second round saw Flair and Savage oppose the Public Enemy. Flair made his entrance first, with Woman and Elizabeth, who was throwing Savage's money to the crowd. Savage attacked from behind, with security getting involved. Flair took a cheap shot before the locker room emptied to separate the two. Amidst the chaos, the Public Enemy were victorious by countout. Later, Mean Gene interviewed Flair, Anderson, Woman, and Elizabeth. Steve Mongo McMichael interrupted after Flair made comments about his wife Deborah. Flair dared McMichael to find one of his old teammates to face him and Anderson. McMichael introduced his partner, football great Kevin Green. Green made an explosive entrance, having to be held back by security. The finals of Battle Bowl consisted of an 8-man battle royal featuring Scott Norton, Ice Train, Dirty Dick Slater, Earl Robert Eaton, the Public Enemy, Diamond Dallas Page, and the Barbarian. It came down to DDP and the Barbarian, who were partners throughout the tournament. After taking a beating, DDP hit a diamond cutter out of nowhere to win the tournament and the Battle Bowl ring. The main event saw the Giant defend the WCW World Heavyweight Championship against Sting. The Giant dominated, dragging Sting to the floor and attempting to chokeslam him through a table. Lex Luger interfered and threw Jimmy Hart onto the table, The Giant threw Sting to the floor and eventually back into the ring. Sting battled back, hitting a Stinger Splash. After the referee got knocked out, Luger got onto the apron, with the Giant grabbing him by the throat. It took 3 Stinger Splashes for the Giant to break his grip. Luger fought hard on the apron, struggling to get out of their handcuffs. Sting went to hit a Stinger Splash on Hart, who moved due to Luger falling to the floor. Sting hit the steel turnbuckle and then fell a Giant chokeslam. That was enough for the Giant to retain his World Heavyweight Championship. The Nature Boy Ric Flair faced Eddie Guerrero on the May 20th episode of Monday Nitro. 2 of the all-time greats battled in an excellent back-and-forth bout. Guerrero did his best to frustrate Flair, getting into his head with ease and speeding up the pace. Flair proved to be a master technician, slowing down the pace when in control. Guerrero battled back and hit a frog splash. Despite connecting, Guerrero injured his knee on impact. Flair slapped on the figure 4 leg lock, grabbed onto Woman's arms for leverage, and scored a victory by submission. Following the bout, Mean Gene caught up with Flair, Elizabeth, and Woman. Gene warned Flair that Savage may be around, which didn't seem to bother the Nature Boy. Flair went on to talk trash about Steve Mongo McMichael and Kevin Green. The WCW World Tag Team Champions, Sting and Lex Luger, defended their titles against Ming and the Barbarian, the Faces of Fear. After a wild back-and-forth bout, Sting hit Barbarian with a huge splash off the top rope and scored the pinfall victory. Mean Gene interviewed DDP, who gave his Battle Bowl victory speech, but was soon informed that since his foot was under the rope when he scored the pinfall, he wouldn't receive a world title shot at the Great American Bash. Instead, Lex Luger would receive the title shot. DDP left the ring in a huff. The May 27th episode of Monday Nitro featured the shocking debut of Scott Hall. Fresh off a run in the WWF, Hall made his way through the crowd and over the guardrail, putting a screeching halt to the match in the ring between the Mauler and Steve Dahl. Hall grabbed the microphone, saying the famous words, "You know who I am, but you don't know why I'm here." He went on to ask where WCW stars were, while Tony Schiavone asked on commentary where security was. Hall said that he had a challenge to issue later in the evening for that Ken doll lookalike, Eric Bischoff. Before he left the ring, he said, "You want a war? You're gonna get one." The main event saw Sting take on Scott Steiner. They initially shook hands, but soon went to battle in a hard-fought bout. Lex Luger and Rick Steiner made their way to the ring later in the bout, eventually brawling into the ring and causing a double disqualification. All hell broke loose with the 2 teams brawling, causing the locker room to empty to separate them. Scott Hall returned later in the broadcast, raiding the broadcast booth to confront Eric Bischoff. He said, "You have such a big mouth, and we are sick of it." Hall went on to say, "You tell billionaire Ted to get 3 of his very best." He followed by saying, "We are taking over." Hall said they should settle their issue in the ring, where it matters. Bischoff said that Hall was out of line before awkwardly ending the broadcast. A vignette aired on the June 3rd episode of Monday Nitro, featuring Steve Mongo McMichael and Kevin Green coming up for a game plan for their upcoming match at the Great American Bash. They agreed upon the idea of asking Macho Man Randy Savage to be their coach. Savage called into the broadcast and said that since WCW won't let him wrestle, he will be the coach of Mongo and Green at the Bash. WCW Tag Team Champions Sting and Lex Luger battled the Steiner Brothers in the main event. Tempers flared, and the bout was ruled a double disqualification. WCW World Heavyweight Champion The Giant made his way down the aisle, delivering a chokeslam to Rick Steiner. The Giant entered the ring and was immediately attacked by Lex Luger. Sting and Scott Steiner aided Luger in ridding the ring of the Giant. The end of the show saw Scott Hall make his way to the broadcast booth and once again harass Eric Bischoff. Sting interrupted, saying he and Hall can settle things one-on-one. Hall threw a toothpick at Sting, who retaliated by slapping Hall in the face. Security got between the two, with Hall saying he had a big surprise for next week. WCW World Heavyweight Champion The Giant defeated Scott Flash Norton on the June 10th episode of Monday Nitro. Following the match, Lex Luger ran in and ambushed The Giant. They brawled on the floor until Luger gained the advantage by clobbering The Giant on the head with an ice bucket. Luger raided the broadcast booth and hyped his bout with The Giant at the Great American Bash. WCW Tag Team Champions Sting and Lex Luger faced Nature Boy Ric Flair and Arn Anderson in the main event of the June 10th episode of Monday Nitro. It was an excellent bout, featuring four of the company's best battling tooth and nail. Bobby the Brain Heenan was irate on commentary, hyping his role as the corner man for Flair and Anderson at the Great American Bash. The Giant interfered, knocking out Luger with a forearm to cause a disqualification. Scott Steiner made the save, clobbering the Giant with a wooden chair. Sting also hit the Giant with a chair shot, with Luger following it up by clotheslining the champion. All three clobbered the Giant until the champion shoved them aside and retreated. Mean Gene met up with the Giant in the aisle, who challenged Luger to make their match at the Great American Bash a no disqualification match. The champion went on to predict that Luger would leave the ring on a stretcher. The show ended with Scott Hall invading the broadcast booth. Eric Bischoff asked where the surprise was, with Kevin Nash tapping him on the shoulder. Despite WCW being where the big boys play, Nash took the microphone and said he and Hall aren't there to play. He added they were waiting for WCW to name their 3 team members for an eventual showdown. Bischoff said he'll announce at the Great American Bash who Team WCW will consist of. Nash closed by saying, "The measuring stick just changed around here. You're looking at it." The Great American Bash took place on June 16th and featured the debut of the masked phenomenon, Rey Mysterio Jr. He battled the WCW Cruiserweight Champion, Dean Malenko, in an excellent display of wrestling greatness. Mysterio broke out jaw-dropping high-flying maneuvers, while Malenko used submission maneuvers to slow things down. Mysterio nearly won the bout with a springboard Rana, with Malenko barely kicking out, Mysterio followed it up with a top rope Frankensteiner, but also failed to score a pinfall. Malenko reversed the Rana, pinning Mysterio with his feet hooked on the ropes for an unfair victory. Chris Benoit and the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan battled in a brutal Falls Count Anywhere match. The brawl started in the aisle and made its way to ringside with hard-hitting shots that echoed through the arena. They brawled over the guardrail and into the stands, clobbering one another with countless bruising shots. The action made its way into the men's bathroom, with Sullivan bouncing Benoit off the stalls. Dusty Rhodes made the classic call, "There's a lady in the men's bathroom." Sullivan clobbered Benoit with a bag full of toilet paper rolls before brawling back into the arena. Sullivan tossed Benoit down the arena steps and continued brawling down to ringside. Benoit pulled out a table from under the ring and set it up across the top rope. The two battled to the top of the table, where Benoit superplexed Sullivan all the way to the canvas below. Benoit rolled on top of Sullivan and scored the pinfall victory. Benoit continued clobbering Sullivan until Arn Anderson rushed into the ring. Anderson initially held Benoit back, but that was only so that he could stomp on the Taskmaster himself. The Dungeon of Doom ran to the ring, with Anderson and Benoit retreating. Sting battled Lord Steven Regal, with the Stinger coming out of the gate strong by beating up Regal around ringside. Regal battled back, stretching Sting in numerous submission holds. In one sequence, Regal hit a butterfly suplex on Sting off the second rope, and then locked him in the Regal stretch. After a series of chops, the Stinger fought back, pummeling Regal to the mat with right hands. This led to Sting locking Regal in the Scorpion Deathlock and scoring the victory by submission. The Nature Boy Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, with Bobby the Brain Heenan, Miss Elizabeth, and Woman in their corner, battled Steve Mongo McMichael and Kevin Green, with their wives and Macho Man Randy Savage in their corner. The crowd roared for Mongo and Green, with Savage maintaining order on the outside. A desperate Heenan shouted advice from the floor as the NFL greats put on a surprisingly strong effort. Flair attempted to walk away, but Savage dragged him back to the ring, where Green pummeled the Nature Boy. The crowd went bonkers when Green and Mongo locked Flair and Anderson in stereo figure 4 leg locks. Woman and Liz chased the wives away, while Heenan got in cheap shots when he could, with Savage chasing him off. Flair and Anderson battled back, schooling the NFL players in the wrestling department. After Savage interjected himself, Chris Benoit attacked him at ringside. Woman and Liz returned with Deborah McMichael, Mongo's wife. She presented Mongo with a briefcase, which contained a 4 Horsemen shirt and a whole lot of money. Deborah said, "Take it." Mongo clobbered Green with the briefcase, leading to Flair scoring a pinfall victory. With Mongo, the new 4 Horsemen were in full force and laid the boots to Savage and Green. Eric Bischoff came to the stage, calling out Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Bischoff started by asking if either worked for the WWF, to which both denied. Hall insisted on knowing who would be on Team WCW for their showdown. Bischoff refused to reveal the names. Hall said, "You don't jack us around, and then punched Bischoff in the stomach. Nash followed it up by hitting Bischoff with a jackknife powerbomb through a table. The Great American Bash was headlined by the World Heavyweight Champion, the Giant, facing the Total Package, Lex Luger. Jimmy Hart attempted to interfere, but Sting came to ringside to chase him away. Luger lifted the Giant for the torture rack, but wobbled under the massive weight of the champion. The Giant hit Luger with a chokeslam and scored a pinfall victory to retain his championship. Macho Man Randy Savage was reinstated on the June 17th episode of Monday Nitro and went toe-to-toe with the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Savage began by chasing Bobby Heenan away from the broadcast booth and down to the ring. Flair made his entrance with Miss Elizabeth, Woman, and Deborah McMichael by his side. Savage didn't even let him take his robe off before attacking. Flair gained the advantage and even held Savage for Liz to slap him across the face. Savage battled back, dousing Flair in champagne and clobbering him with the bottle. Savage hit Flair with a flying elbow drop. Before he could hit a second, all three of Flair's valets stood in the way of Savage. He jumped through them, connecting with a second elbow drop. Chris Benoit hit the seam, but Savage cut him off and nailed a big pile driver. Arn Anderson ran in, but Savage made quick work of him. Mongo attacked Savage from behind, clobbering him on the back with a briefcase. He followed it up by clobbering Savage over the head with the briefcase. Mongo dragged Flair on top of Savage, who scored the pinfall victory. The Horsemen beat down Savage, leaving him bruised. The show ended with Mean Gene making a big announcement. He revealed that at Bash at the Beach, Team WCW would face Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and a mystery partner. Team WCW would consist of the Total Package Lex Luger, the Macho Man Randy Savage, and Sting. Eddie Guerrero and the Barbarian battled on the June 24th edition of Monday Nitro in an excellent, hard-hitting hidden gem. Guerrero emerged victorious by pinfall after Barbarian slipped while attempting a superplex. Mean Gene interviewed Guerrero after the bout, questioning him about his loss to Conan months prior at Uncensored. Guerrero announced his bid for another United States Championship shot. He closed by saying that he wished his name was on the list to face the Outsiders at Bash at the Beach. The WCW Tag Team Champions, Sting and Lex Luger, faced the Steiner Brothers and Harlem Heat in a triangle match. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash hopped the guardrail with baseball bats. Security rushed the ring in a wild scene. Amongst the chaos, Harlem Heat managed to become the new WCW World Tag Team Champions. Meanwhile, police officers stood in the ring with their hands on their guns as the Outsiders backed away up the aisle. The Outsiders walked through the crowd on the July 1st episode of Monday Nitro, making their way to the front row. Doug Dillinger and WCW security tried to escort them out of the building, but Hall and Nash produced tickets, which allowed them to stay. Later in the broadcast, Hall and Nash grabbed microphones and made their way to the broadcast booth. Security held the Outsiders back, with the locker room hitting the scene. Nash said, "Is this the best you got? You're gonna need more than that." Security escorted the Outsiders out in a tense scene. Randy Savage attempted to follow, with police officers holding him back. To close the show, police were shown walking the Outsiders out of the arena. In arrogant fashion, Hall and Nash badmouthed the officers and sped away. Bash at the Beach took place on July 7th, live on pay-per-view from Daytona Beach, Florida. In the opening match, Rey Mysterio Jr. battled Psychosis in a high-flying masterpiece. It was a beautiful display of athleticism that brought the crowd to their feet. Mysterio hit a breathtaking Frankensteiner on Psychosis off the ropes and all the way to the arena floor. A twisting acai moonsault to the floor followed shortly after, with Mysterio crashing onto Psychosis. Mysterio attempted a Rana, but Psychosis reversed it into a powerbomb. Psychosis attempted a Splash Mountain off the second rope, but Mysterio reversed it into a Frankensteiner and scored the pinfall victory. The Nasty Boys battled the Public Enemy in a wild double dog collar match. Both teams battled up the aisle and towards the beach-themed entrance stage, which was soon torn apart. Throwing around surfboards and using the lifeguard chair as a weapon, the two dragged one another by the neck through the sand. A table was brought into play, set up in the aisle, and broken unceremoniously. As they brawled back to the ring, Bobby Heenan on commentary said, "What's that big thing in the middle of the room?" A second table was set up in the ring, with Rocco Rock climbing to the top rope. Jerry Saggs yanked the chain, sending Rock tumbling onto the table, bouncing off it. The Nasties strung up Johnny Grunge and clotheslined Rock with a chain stretched across the ring and scored a pinfall victory. The brawling continued, with the issue left unresolved. Conan defended the United States Championship against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Despite Conan's unorthodox offense, Woman aided in Flair gaining the advantage. But Conan fought back resiliently and locked Flair in his own figure 4 leg lock. Later, Conan nearly had the match won until Miss Elizabeth distracted referee Nick Patrick. Woman hopped onto the opposite side of the ring and clobbered Conan with the heel of her shoe. Flair covered Conan, hooked the ropes for leverage, and scored the pinfall victory to become the new United States Champion. Bash at the Beach featured one of the most shocking moments in professional wrestling history. The much talked about main event saw Sting, Lex Luger, and the Macho Man Randy Savage battle the Outsiders, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash. The third outsider wasn't revealed at the start of the match, with the bout beginning as a handicap match. Luger was injured early in the bout after Sting hit a Stinger Splash on Nash while Luger's head was sandwiched in the corner. Paramedics stretchered Luger away, evening the numbers. The Outsiders wore down Sting and Savage, slowing down the pace. Sting got the better of Nash in a slugfest and tagged in a fresh Savage. After dropping multiple double axe handles, Savage went down for a low blow from Nash. The crowd rose to their feet as Hulk Hogan emerged from the entrance. On commentary, Bobby Heenan said, "But whose side is he on?" Little did he know how prophetic that question was. Hogan entered the ring and did the unthinkable. He dropped a big leg onto Savage, signaling he was the third man on the team of the Outsiders. The crowd booed as Hogan high-fived Hall and Nash and tossed referee Randy Anderson to the floor. Hogan hit another leg drop onto Savage and covered him, with Hall making the 3 count. The trio of Hogan, Hall, and Nash posed as the fans began to throw garbage into the ring. Sting pulled an injured Savage out of harm's way as Mean Gene entered the ring to make sense of the madness. Gene asked Hogan, "What in the world are you thinking?" Hogan said, "The first thing you need to do is tell these people to shut up." Hogan proclaimed Hall and Nash the future of wrestling and referred to their alliance as the New World Order of Wrestling, brother. He added that he made the people up north rich and became bigger than the organization. Even Ted Turner and Eric Bischoff brought him into the company, but he still outgrew it. Hogan said he wants to be on the side of Hall and Nash and said they were going to take over. Hogan compared the fans to the garbage they threw into the ring. He went on to tell the fans to stick it. Hogan said, "If it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, none of you would be here." He closed by saying, "What you gonna do when Hulk Hogan and the New World Organization of Wrestling run wild on you?" Garbage continued to fill the ring as the NWO began to pose. Tony Schiavone closed the show on commentary by saying, "Hulk Hogan, you can go to hell." The July 8th edition of Monday Nitro featured a bout between the WCW Cruiserweight Champion Dean Malenko and Rey Mysterio Jr. It was another excellent encounter between two of the division's best. After numerous near falls, Malenko hit a huge top rope gutbuster on Mysterio. He could have gotten the win, but Malenko broke the pin just before the referee could count 3 in order to inflict more damage. This was a critical mistake, as Mysterio was able to hit a Rana on Malenko to score the pinfall victory and become the new WCW Cruiserweight Champion. The main event at the MGM Grand pit Sting against Arn Anderson. During the bout, Hall and Nash made their way through the crowd. Security attempted to hold them back as Macho Man Randy Savage rushed to the scene. Meanwhile, Sting defeated Anderson with a Scorpion Deathlock. As the Outsiders made their exit, Mean Gene interviewed Sting in the ring. In regards to Hulk Hogan, Sting said, "I should have known." He referenced Hogan's cameo appearances, choosing acting over WCW. Sting said that he made a mistake, but Hogan made a bigger mistake. He went on to say, "It's a good thing you told them to believe in themselves, because they sure can't believe in you." Sting closed by telling Hogan to stick it. Savage added that it was scary what he wanted to do to get revenge on Hogan. After a commercial break, Mean Gene interviewed the Outsiders. Hall said that they did exactly what they said they were going to do at Bash at the Beach. Nash added that Hogan would make an appearance next week. The main event of the July 16th edition of Monday Nitro saw the WCW World Television Champion Lex Luger defend his title against Big Bubba Rogers. During the bout, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash exited their limo and attacked Luger in the ring. Hulk Hogan, dressed in all black, wasn't far behind, entering as Nash hit a jackknife powerbomb on Luger. Hogan got in Luger's face, slapping him around. Hogan helped Bubba to his feet and shook his hand before the Outsiders ambushed him. Mean Gene entered the ring for a comment, with Hogan saying he wished he'd done this 2 years ago. He claimed to be bigger than professional wrestling and proclaimed that the NWO would take over the wrestling world. The fans filled the ring with garbage as Hogan said that he made professional wrestling. Gene asked if we'd see more members of the NWO, with Hogan saying maybe we'd see people from his past, or maybe he'd recruit people closest to Ted Turner and Eric Bischoff. Hogan went on to challenge the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, The Giant, to face him at Hog Wild. He said he was going to win the title and christen it as the NWO Championship. Hogan closed by challenging the locker room to face them. The Steiner brothers led a line of wrestlers who surrounded the ring as the show went off the air. The main event of the July 22nd edition of Monday Nitro saw Sting, Lex Luger, and the Macho Man Randy Savage battle Arn Anderson, Chris Benoit, and Steve Mongo McMichael. Ric Flair was nowhere to be found, with some speculating that he could be in cahoots with the NWO. It didn't take long for the action to get out of hand, with Woman, Miss Elizabeth, and Deborah screaming in the aisle. This caught the attention of Savage, who stole the briefcase full of money from Deborah and clobbered Benoit with it. Luger covered Benoit to score the pinfall victory, while Savage celebrated with the remains of his money now in his possession. Mean Gene interviewed the winners following the match, with Sting and Luger hyping their upcoming bout against the Outsiders at Hog Wild. The July 27th edition of WCW Saturday Night featured a paid announcement from the NWO. The footage was grainy and shot in black and white, featuring jump cuts of Hollywood Hogan and the Outsiders, teasing new members. Scott Hall said, "Don't call us, we'll call you." They ran down the roster and hyped the upcoming Hog Wild pay-per-view. Later, footage was shown of Lex Luger and Sting leaving the arena. Luger was called back to take a phone call. The Outsiders ambushed Sting, ramming him against a car and bruising him with right hands. The July 29th episode of Monday Nitro featured one of the most wild scenes in company history. It all began with Nature Boy Ric Flair leading Steve Mongo McMichael and Chris Benoit into battle against Sting, Lex Luger, and Macho Man Randy Savage. All six brawled before the bell rang, starting off hot as the referee tried desperately to maintain order. After a commercial break, order was restored and the match officially began. The action was eventually interrupted by a frantic Jimmy Hart who was pleading for help. He informed the wrestlers of an incident in the parking lot, which they all, along with the cameras, rushed to attend to. In the parking lot, Hall and Nash wielded baseball bats with bodies strewn over the ground. Rey Mysterio Jr. jumped off a railing and onto Nash, who caught Mysterio and threw him into the side of a production truck, head first, like he was a dart. As Team WCW and the Four Horsemen made their way to the scene, the Outsiders retreated into their limo. Savage jumped onto the roof of the limo as it drove away, hanging on by the sunroof. Paramedics attended to an injured Arn Anderson, as well as the American males. The locker room emptied in an attempt to make sense of the attack. Woman wept over Anderson, as Mongo screamed that the Outsiders would pay. An injured Mysterio claimed that he was attacked by 4 men, further adding to the confusion. Mysterio's mask was even removed as he was attended to, which Tony Schiavone stressed on commentary was a big deal in the lucha libre culture. Backup arrived as the wounded wrestlers were loaded into ambulances. On commentary, Bobby Heenan walked off the set, saying to Eric Bischoff that he couldn't risk having his already injured neck re-injured. It was complete pandemonium, with cameras staying on the scene of panic in the parking lot. The Nature Boy Ric Flair battled the Booty Man on the August 5th episode of Monday Nitro. The remaining members of the Horsemen, as well as the Dungeon of Doom, stood guard, making sure the NWO didn't interfere. Because of these precautions, Bobby Heenan finally felt safe enough to return to the broadcast booth. The match in the ring ended by disqualification after the Horsemen attacked the Booty Man while Flair had him locked in the figure 4. Anderson attacked the Booty Man with a chair, sending a message by injuring Hulk Hogan's longtime friend. Mean Gene entered the ring and pleaded for the carnage to end. Arn Anderson cut an excellent promo, citing biblical passages that the New World Order is a sign of the end times. But WCW wasn't going down without a fight, and Anderson declared war. Flair went on to say that Hogan crossed the line by attacking his best friend, Arn Anderson, last week. Flair looked down at a wounded Booty Man and said, "Here's your best friend, come and get him." A paid announcement aired from the NWO, spawning a revolutionary vignette style, filmed in black and white and featuring multiple jump cuts. In general, the message was clear. The New World Order's sole purpose was to take over WCW. Hogan said that with Hog Wild taking place on his birthday, he couldn't think of a better gift than to take the WCW World Heavyweight Championship from the Giant and christen it the NWO Championship. Sting and Lex Luger went into the production truck and had the tape stopped. Hog Wild took place on August 10th amongst a sea of motorcycles, live on pay-per-view from Sturgis, South Dakota at the world's largest motorcycle rally. A vignette aired featuring the Nature Boy Ric Flair discussing the NWO's attack on WCW. He said, "It's on now." Medusa rode her Harley Davidson to the ring to battle Bull Nakano. Sonny Ono swung a sledgehammer at Medusa's motorcycle. After winning the match, Medusa wrestled the sledgehammer away from Ono and used it to destroy his Honda. Dean Malenko battled Chris Benoit in an excellent, hard-hitting encounter that went to a time-limit draw. A 5-minute overtime was instituted, which went the distance. A second 5-minute overtime was instituted, with referee Nick Patrick saying that there must be a winner. Woman got involved, distracting Malenko and allowing Benoit to roll him up for a pinfall victory. Sting and Lex Luger battled the Outsiders. Hall and Nash largely dominated the match, with Bobby Heenan catching himself on commentary, cheering for Hall. Tony Schiavone and Dusty Rhodes scolded him for rooting for the enemy, with Heenan quickly changing his tune and apologizing profusely. Sting and Luger gained the advantage, with Sting locking Nash in the Scorpion Deathlock on the floor. In the ring, Luger lifted Hall up for the torture rack, accidentally striking referee Nick Patrick in the process. In a shocking twist, Patrick punched Luger on the back of the leg. Hall covered Luger, with Patrick making a lightning-fast 3 count to give the Outsiders the victory. In the main event, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion, The Giant, defended his title against Hollywood Hulk Hogan. The typically red and yellow Hogan debuted new black and white gear, complete with a dark beard and a NWO shirt. Hogan initially stalled, telling the fans to shut up. The Giant manhandled Hogan, easily gaining the advantage and even hulking up at one point. Scott Hall rushed to the ring, climbing to the top rope. The Giant slammed Hall to the mat and then hit him with a big chokeslam. Kevin Nash attempted to ambush the Giant with Jimmy Hart's microphone, but the Giant thwarted the plan and hit Nash with a chokeslam. Hogan grabbed the megaphone and clobbered the Giant off the face. The referee turned around to see Hogan covering the Giant, making the 3 count. Hollywood Hogan was crowned the new WCW World Heavyweight Champion, celebrating with Hall and Nash. The Booty Man made his way to the ring in a NWO shirt and presented Hogan with a birthday cake. Hogan thanked the Booty Man for the gesture, but then ordered Hall and Nash to attack him. In response to Flair, Hogan said, "If I'm willing to do this to my best friend, what am I going to do to you?" Nash held up the WCW Championship, while Hogan spray-painted NWO on the center plate in black spray paint. On commentary, former champion Dusty Rhodes said, "This is turning my stomach." Hogan then raised the tainted championship high above his head in victory. Despite being challenged at the start of the show by Sting and Lex Luger, the NWO rested comfortably in their locker room on the August 12th edition of Monday Nitro. Hogan talked about how he hated the look of the WCW Championship. Nash suggested he have it melted down. The Outsiders seemed unfazed by the challenge from Sting and Luger. The Nature Boy Ric Flair battled the Macho Man Randy Savage. The referee was rendered unconscious, leading to Hollywood Hogan attacking Savage from behind with a chair. Flair, however, was unharmed, leading to speculation that the Nature Boy may be in cahoots with the NWO. Referee Nick Patrick ran and counted Flair's pinfall victory. Following the match, Mean Gene interviewed Hogan at the entrance. Hogan said he didn't harm Flair so that there were no more excuses when they faced one another at the Clash of the Champions. The main event saw the Outsiders battle Sting and Lex Luger, with Nick Patrick as the referee and heavily favoring Hall and Nash. In the end, Sting ran at Hall with a Stinger Splash. Patrick suddenly pulled Hall out of the corner, with Sting colliding with the ring post. The match ended in a no contest, with the Horsemen chasing off the Outsiders. The Champions took place on August 15th, headlined by the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hogan against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. During the bout, Hogan missed a leg drop, with Flair following it up with a figure 4 leg lock. Hogan knocked out referee Randy Anderson, leading to the Outsiders running in from the crowd to pummel Flair. Sting, Lex Luger, and the Horsemen ran in and chased off the NWO, who retreated through the crowd. Flair was declared the winner by disqualification in a very anticlimactic ending. The August 19th episode of Monday Nitro featured an excellent mat wrestling bout between Lord Steven Regal and Dean Malenko. After an exciting sequence of near falls, Malenko pinned Regal for the victory. The show was scheduled to feature Sting and Lex Luger against the Nature Boy Ric Flair and Arn Anderson. Instead, Sting demanded that the remaining Horsemen come to the ring. Mean Gene entered the ring, getting the scoop from Sting. The Stinger recognized that there was a major problem in WCW, and they needed to work together. The Stinger proposed that Flair and Anderson join he and Luger to face the NWO in War Games next month at Fall Brawl. Anderson questioned whether Sting and Luger could handle the brutality of the match, but the Stinger assured them that they could. Flair had the final say, and the deal was made official. The Outsiders were shown hanging out in Italy, talking trash about the WCW roster. Kevin Nash referred to them all as pathetic. Juventud Guerrera made his debut on the August 26th episode of Monday Nitro, defeating Billy Kidman with a top rope Frankensteiner. The Giant battled Hacksaw Jim Duggan. During the bout, Ted DiBiase made his way to the front row. DiBiase took a seat and motioned with his hands the number 5. He'd continue to sit in the crowd for the next few weeks. Chris Jericho made his debut, battling Alex Wright to a no contest. Initially, Wright was counted out, but the noble Jericho refused to accept a victory under those conditions. Because of this, the referee declared the match a draw. The following week, Jericho picked up an upset victory over Dean Malenko in a great outing. Hollywood Hogan and the Outsiders spray-painted NWO on a Turner production truck. In the main event, the NWO interrupted a match featuring Sting and Lex Luger against Mongo McMichael and Chris Benoit. It was an all-out beatdown, with the NWO spray-painting their initials on the backs of Sting, Flair, and Mongo. An overzealous Hogan even sprayed paint right into one of the cameras. The show ended with the NWO invading the broadcast booth. Hogan spray-painted NWO on the Monday Nitro logo. The September 2nd edition of Monday Nitro saw the NWO pay for an advertisement, this time with a vignette of Hollywood Hogan taping War Games and calling WCW World Crybaby Wrestling. Hogan said, "Sting will be stung, Luger will be hung, Flair won't even be there, and Arn won't be Arn anymore." Later, the 4 Horsemen battled the Dungeon of Doom. Backstage, Sting and Lex Luger chased referee Nick Patrick out of the arena for costing them a match earlier in the evening against the Steiner brothers. Patrick rushed into the limo of Ted DiBiase with the pair driving away. But they wouldn't get away unscathed as Sting tossed a brick through the window. Sting and Luger commandeered a police car and chased after the limo. Back in the ring, the NWO hit the scene, creating a wild moment. The Giant hit the scene, but turned on his Dungeon of Doom teammates and became the 4th member of the NWO. Macho Man Randy Savage hit the ring with a chair, clobbering everyone and brawling with Hogan. Nash quickly attacked Savage, with Hogan clobbering the Macho Man over the head with the chair. The Giant followed it up by chokeslamming Savage. Hogan capitalized by dropping multiple leg drops on Savage as fans threw trash into the ring. Hogan spray-painted NWO on Savage's chest and then a yellow streak down his back. The NWO invaded the broadcast booth, where they all spit on the WCW Monday Nitro sign. The Horsemen and the Dungeon of Doom attacked from behind, leading to a chaotic brawl. After officials broke things up, the NWO went back to the broadcast booth, where Hogan said, "Whether you like it or you don't like it, it's the best thing going today." The Giant flipped over the broadcast desk to end a wild episode of Monday Nitro. Jacques Rougeau and Pierre-Carl Ouellet, the amazing French Canadians, made their debut on the September 9th episode of Monday Nitro, getting booed for singing the Canadian national anthem. Mean Gene conducted a backstage interview with Lex Luger, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and Arn Anderson. Sting was nowhere to be found, with Flair irate and Luger defending his tag team partner. Luger said you can always count on the Stinger. Anderson was focused, saying to the NWO, "You started this fire, now you're going to watch it burn." Meanwhile, the NWO marched through the parking lot, putting flyers on cars, trying to recruit new members for the NWO. Meanwhile, Ted DiBiase talked to someone in the NWO limo who remained off camera. Lex Luger battled Rick Steiner later in the broadcast, with Nick Patrick interrupting and waving at Luger. Luger raced to the parking lot, where DiBiase was talking to someone in the limo that sounded exactly like Sting. Luger hit the scene, where he was beat down by the NWO and what was presumably Sting. DiBiase cackled in the background and got in a few cheap shots on Luger for good measure. In a paid announcement, the NWO stood behind a cage and revealed that Ted DiBiase was their financial benefactor, with Hogan saying that DiBiase had more money than Ted Turner. DiBiase demanded that the NWO have their own segment on Nitro without them having to pay for it. Later, Team WCW stole spray paint out of the NWO's abandoned limo and painted WCW across the side. The Horsemen invaded the broadcast booth, with Arn Anderson saying that since Hogan couldn't cut it as a Horseman, he had to form his own group of flunkies. Anderson then said that he was going to take Sting's head off. In reference to War Games, Flair said, "Hogan, you won't leave town alive." Fall Brawl took place on September 15th and featured a great back-and-forth bout between Chris Jericho and Chris Benoit. Benoit was victorious after a beautiful top rope backdrop. Super Callow made his debut, falling short in his match against the WCW Cruiserweight Champion Rey Mysterio Jr. Macho Man Randy Savage battled the Giant, even body slamming him before hitting a flying elbow drop. Hollywood Hogan crept to ringside, catching the attention of Savage. The Macho Man chased Hogan up the aisle, where Scott Hall charged through the curtain. Nash was close behind with a chair, clobbering Savage over the back. Of course, the referee was Nick Patrick, who turned his back to the beatdown. The NWO threw Savage back into the ring, where the Giant covered him and scored a pinfall victory. The main event of Fall Brawl was War Games, which featured Team WCW against the NWO. Prior to the bout, Mean Gene interviewed Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Lex Luger backstage. Sting interrupted, with Flair and Anderson ready to fight him. Sting claimed that wasn't him on Monday Nitro, with Luger refusing to believe it. Despite this, Sting said he had their back. The match began with Scott Hall and Arn Anderson battling it out in the initial 5-minute period, with the NWO winning the coin toss. Bobby Heenan on commentary said, "Check the coin." Kevin Nash came out next for the NWO, helping Hall pound on Anderson. Lex Luger came out next for Team WCW, manhandling the Outsiders. Hollywood Hogan entered next for the NWO, with Anderson and Luger ripping the shirt off of his back and attacking him. The numbers were against Luger and Anderson, who suffered a beatdown for the period. Nature Boy Ric Flair raced to the ring next, begging Hogan to come and get him. The two battled alone in one ring, with Flair knocking out Hogan and striking both Hall and Nash with low blows. The final member of the NWO team was revealed, and it was Sting. He immediately attacked Team WCW, laying the boots to Luger especially. The final member of Team WCW was revealed, and it was the real Sting. The real Sting confronted the imposter Sting, taking him out easily and single-handedly taking down the rest of the NWO. He went on to deliver stinger splashes to the entire opposing team as his teammates looked on, shocked. Sting said, "Is that good enough for you right there?" before walking off and abandoning his team. The numbers proved to be too much for Team WCW, with the NWO taking control. The fake Sting locked a Scorpion Deathlock on Savage, with Hogan locking in a front face lock to add insult to injury. Referee Nick Patrick called for the bell, with the NWO declared the winners. While the cage raised to the ceiling, the NWO continued to lay the boots to Team WCW. Luger tried crawling away, screaming for the stinger, but the NWO stomped on him. Randy Savage dragged Hogan back to the ring by the hair. The Giant attacked Savage from behind before he could cause any damage and nailed a big chokeslam. Miss Elizabeth ran to ringside, begging for Hogan to stop beating down Savage. Liz crawled on top of Savage to protect him, with Hogan spray painting NWO on the back of her dress. Hogan spit on Savage and Elizabeth and called them two pieces of trash. The NWO continued the beatdown, with the Giant spray painting NWO on Savage's back. From there, the NWO took over the broadcast booth to brag about their victory. The September 16th edition of Monday Nitro featured the first appearance of Sean Waltman, referred to as the former 1-2-3 Kid, and shown sitting in the crowd. Later, the NWO arrived to the building in their limo, exiting carrying red Solo cups. Later, Waltman stood on his chair and pressed the button on a remote control. Flyers began falling from the ceiling, with the NWO logo printed on them. It was revealed that the sixth member of the NWO was Waltman, who would go by the name Six. Glacier made his debut, defeating Big Bubba Rogers. Sting came to the ring, addressing all the people that doubted him. He said he's given Lex Luger the benefit of the doubt for the past year and has always carried the WCW banner. For those that doubted him, Sting said they can stick it. He said he considers himself a free agent and he's going to pop in when you least expect it. Later, Lex Luger battled Ric Flair and Arn Anderson all by himself. The match ended in a disqualification after Steve Mongo McMichael and Chris Benoit joined in on stomping Luger. The September 23rd episode of Monday Nitro saw the Public Enemy defeat Harlem Heat to become the new WCW World Tag Team Champions. Mike Tenay interviewed the Macho Man Randy Savage, who wasn't concerned about being a marked man. Savage claimed to have canceled a booking in Japan in order to defend the honor of WCW. He closed by saying that at Halloween Havoc, he's taking Hogan out. Savage went on to face Greg the Hammer Valentine, with the NWO interrupting to attack the Macho Man. A concerned Miss Elizabeth looked on from the entrance as Nash hit Savage with a big jackknife powerbomb. The Giant gave Hollywood Hogan a formal introduction, while the NWO continued to embarrass Savage. Hogan hit multiple leg drops on Savage and then spray painted the Macho Man's bald spot. Hall hit an outsider's edge on Savage, with Nash following up with a jackknife powerbomb. The NWO invaded the broadcast booth, with the Outsiders forcing Eric Bischoff to stay behind and commentate with them. Nash introduced a new member of the NWO, the head of Ted DiBiase's security, Vincent, the former Virgil. The NWO even revealed their own NASCAR race car. Hollywood Hogan approached the Nasty Boys backstage, saying he wanted to talk business with them. Hogan gave them his hotel key and said to wait for him. The show ended with the NWO piled in the broadcast booth, still holding Bischoff hostage. The September 30th episode of Monday Nitro began with Eric Bischoff addressing the NWO's takeover last week. Bischoff said that the attacks have to stop and referred to the NWO as a bunch of dirtbags. He went on to say that bringing Hulk Hogan into WCW was the biggest mistake of his career. Bischoff ended by saying, "No more." Despite this, the NWO aired a series of vignettes where they partied in a hotel suite. DiBiase bragged that since the NWO beat WCW at War Games, the NWO no longer has to pay for their announcements. Later, the Nasty Boys joined the party. Mike Tenay interviewed Arn Anderson, Woman, and Miss Elizabeth backstage. Anderson scolded Elizabeth and told her to leave her heart out of the business. Woman reminded Liz that business is business. Meanwhile, a torn Elizabeth said she didn't know if she could do this anymore. To close out the show, Elizabeth joined the NWO in their suite. Hogan negotiated with Liz to join the NWO, but she sneaked off before signing a deal. Macho Man Randy Savage saw Elizabeth walk out of the suite. he freaked out, thinking Elizabeth was setting him up. The October 5th episode of WCW Saturday Night saw referee Nick Patrick announce that he was fining Macho Man Randy Savage $1 million for putting his hands on him. Patrick also said that he was lobbying for Savage's suspension. Harlem Heat defeated the Public Enemy to become the new WCW World Tag Team Champions. A rematch took place 2 days later on the October 7th edition of WCW Monday Nitro. The NWO watched from the crowd, with the Outsiders taunting Harlem Heat, hyping their upcoming match at Halloween Havoc. Harlem Heat emerged victorious, retaining their titles. A limo arrived, with the debuting Jeff Jarrett stepping out. Later in the broadcast, Jarrett picked up a victory over Hugh Morris. Tony Schiavone interviewed Jarrett following the bout, assuming Jarrett was a member of the NWO. Jarrett denied these claims and told the NWO to stick it. The main event was scheduled to feature Macho Man Randy Savage against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. Savage waited in the ring, but the NWO were laying the boots to Flair backstage. The Giant backed Elizabeth all the way to the stage, with Savage close behind with a chair. It was a trap, as Hollywood Hogan attacked Savage from behind. Hogan forced Liz to watch as the Giant carried Savage to the ring. Hogan pounded on an unconscious Savage, capitalizing with multiple leg drops. Afterwards, Hogan spray-painted the outline of Savage's body on the canvas. The rest of the NWO hit the scene, with Hogan taunting Elizabeth in front of an unconscious Savage. Six soon arrived in the arena with an NWO monster truck to end the broadcast. Tony Schiavone informed Nick Patrick on the October 14th episode of Monday Nitro that Macho Man Randy Savage would only be fined $500 and he'd miss 5 matches at the beginning of 1997. Patrick was irate, referring to WCW management as spineless jellyfish. Eric Bischoff interviewed the Macho Man Randy Savage and presented a video which showed Elizabeth apologizing to Savage. The Macho Man was speechless, walking off the set with tears in his eyes and Bischoff chasing after him. Moments later, Savage exited the arena in his limo. The NWO made their way to the ring on the final segment of the show. Hollywood Hogan bragged about having full control over Savage. The Nasty Boys made their way to the ring in NWO shirts, but Brian Knobbs complained about their NWO contracts. Hogan said he never signed the contracts, and sicked the rest of the NWO onto the Nasty Boys, bashing them unconscious. Hogan continued to brag about having Elizabeth under his thumb, further taunting Savage. The Outsiders and Six took over the broadcast booth to end the episode. The October 21st edition of Monday Nitro featured a bout between the NWO Sting and Mr. JL. It was a quick bout, with the NWO Sting winning with a Scorpion Deathlock. Suddenly, the real Sting, wearing a black trench coat and black and white face paint, emerged from the entrance. Sting snuck up behind the NWO Sting and delivered a reverse DDT, which would go on to be called the Scorpion Death Drop. Sting followed it up with a Stinger Splash and a Scorpion Deathlock. the NWO surrounded Sting, with DiBiase offering him a spot in the NWO. Scott Hall attempted to persuade Sting to join them, citing that WCW never did anything for him. Sting responded by saying that he wasn't in the NWO's price range. He then said, "The only thing that's sure about Sting is nothing's for sure." Sting then marched away up the aisle. Macho Man Randy Savage walked around backstage, dressed in all black. Eric Bischoff stopped him and apologized for putting him on the spot last week. Bischoff then showed Savage footage of Hollywood Hogan on a movie set. The Giant took over as the director, with Hogan forcing Elizabeth to say that she loves Savage. Elizabeth was visibly uncomfortable, with Hogan ordering the Giant to take Liz to her trailer. Hogan scolded Elizabeth in the trailer, telling her to pretend to love Savage. Bischoff asked Savage for a reaction, with the Macho Man telling Hogan that life is fragile. Halloween Havoc took place on October 26th and began with the WCW Cruiserweight Champion Rey Mysterio Jr. defending the title against Dean Malenko. Rey reclaimed the mask stolen by Malenko and proceeded to put it on. Malenko grounded Mysterio using a submission-based strategy. Mysterio battled back, hitting a springboard tumbleweed off the ropes and landing on Malenko on the floor. Back in the ring, Mysterio connected with a springboard Rana, with Malenko kicking out of a pinfall attempt at 2. Mysterio attempted another, but Malenko reversed it into a powerbomb and attempted a pinfall, with Mysterio barely kicking out. Mysterio attempted a top rope Frankensteiner, but Malenko reversed it into a super gut-wrench powerbomb all the way to the canvas. Malenko scored the pinfall victory to become the new WCW Cruiserweight Champion. Ted DiBiase stood amongst the fans, announcing NWO members for their matches. The Outsiders defeated Harlem Heat to become the new WCW World Tag Team Champions after Kevin Nash stole Colonel Parker's cane and used it to score a pinfall victory. In the main event, the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hogan defended his title against the Macho Man Randy Savage. With Hogan accompanied by the Giant, Savage was backed by a custom Macho Man monster truck. The match started slow, with Hogan trying his best to stay away from Savage. Savage stole Hogan's sunglasses and ripped off his wig. An embarrassed Hogan tried to leave up the aisle, but Savage chased after him, shoving the toupee in Hollywood's mouth. Savage followed it up by clobbering Hogan with a chair. Just as the referee got the chair away, Hogan grabbed it and waffled Savage. Miss Elizabeth made her way to ringside, getting under the skin of Hogan, who used her as a shield to protect himself from an irate Savage. Elizabeth threw herself on top of Savage in the ring to prevent a leg drop, with Hogan lifting her up by the chin and backing her into a corner. Hogan would go on to miss the leg drop. Ted DiBiase handed Hogan a foreign object, which Elizabeth was able to apprehend. Referee Randy Anderson was knocked out by a wild elbow from Hogan, which brought out crooked referee Nick Patrick. Meanwhile, Savage hit a flying elbow drop onto Hogan, with Patrick refusing to make the 3 count. Savage punched Patrick and then stole the foreign object from Hogan. Savage knocked out Hogan with the weapon and then climbed to the top rope. DiBiase pulled on Savage's leg, leading to the Macho Man stalking him on the floor. The Giant ran to ringside and chokeslammed Savage onto the floor. From there, the Giant dragged the unconscious body of Hogan on top of Savage. Despite seeing the entire turn of events, Patrick counted Hogan's pinfall victory over Savage. The Giant brought a bowl of ice water to the ring and poured it onto Hogan to wake him up. Hogan cut a promo following the match, bragging that he could beat anybody that got in his way. The sound of bagpipes filled the arena, with Rowdy Roddy Piper making his debut to confront Hogan. Piper said, "So you're bored? I've come here to break your monotony." He then said to Hogan, "I've come here to give you a reality check. I'm just as big a star as you are." Whenever the Giant would take a step forward, Piper would look at him and say, "Step back, Sprout." Piper then said, "I'm the only guy that you've never been able to beat." Hogan finally admitted that Piper was just as big a star, with the two shaking hands. As Piper exited, Hogan threw out the insults. Piper returned for more jaw-jacking as the show went off the air. The following night on Monday Nitro, Hogan responded to the incident. First, Hogan claimed that the NWO conquered and won at Halloween Havoc. Hogan then claimed that he saw fear in Piper's eyes, as well as calling Piper's kilt a skirt. Sting appeared in the crowd on the November 4th edition of Monday Nitro. He debuted a new look reminiscent of Eric Draven from the movie The Crow. Sting's face was painted white with black around his eyes and lips. He also wore all black under a long black trench coat. Nitro ended with the NWO coming to the ring and Hollywood Hogan talking more trash about Rowdy Roddy Piper. This time, Hogan said that Piper had no heart. The November 11th edition of Monday Nitro saw Mean Gene interview Diamond Dallas Page at the stage. Gene questioned whether DDP was in cahoots with the NWO since they'd helped him win a match recently. The Outsiders interrupted, offering DDP a spot in the NWO. DDP was insulted that they hadn't come to him sooner. Kevin Nash said that DDP lives 2 houses away from Eric Bischoff, with DDP thinking that meant that he didn't earn his spot. The Outsiders left and said, "You don't get it." Monday Nitro featured a music video from Rowdy Roddy Piper singing his song, "I'm Your Man." Lex Luger defeated Hugh Morris on the November 18th episode of Monday Nitro. Mean Gene interviewed Luger following the match, with Sting interrupting. Sting carried a baseball bat, which he initially shoved Luger with. Afterwards, Sting handed the bat to Luger and then exited through the crowd. Mean Gene interviewed Diamond Dallas Page. The Outsiders, Six, and the Giant interrupted, with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash again saying to DDP that he didn't get it. Eric Bischoff stood in the ring, saying that he was trying to sign a match between the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hogan and Rowdy Roddy Piper. Piper made his way to the ring and got in Bischoff's face, calling him a liar. Before Piper could cause any damage, the NWO ran in and ambushed Piper. In a shocking moment, Hollywood Hogan hugged Eric Bischoff and named him as the newest member of the NWO. WCW security and police filled the ring to save Piper and hold him back. World War III took place on November 24th and began with Rey Mysterio Jr. facing Ultimo Dragon. It was an excellent fast-paced bout with numerous high-flying maneuvers. The conclusion saw Mysterio attempt a springboard Rana, but Dragon reversed it into a powerbomb and scored the pinfall victory. Rowdy Roddy Piper came to the ring with a contract in his hand. He called out the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hogan, but instead got Eric Bischoff, who said he had power of attorney to sign for Hogan. Piper was less than receptive, wanting to hear from Hogan himself for what he called the fight of the century. Hogan came to the ring, accompanied by the rest of the NWO. Hollywood criticized Piper for having a bad hip, lifting Piper's kilt to show off a scar. Despite this, Hogan signed the contract to face Piper on December 29th at Starcade. The NWO attacked Piper, with Hogan clobbering him on the hip with a chair. Scott Hall and the Giant held down Piper while Hogan spray-painted NWO on his hip. Hogan spit on Piper before leaving the ring. Piper pulled himself to his feet and flipped over a table to scare off the rest of the NWO. The main event featured the three-ring, 60-man World War III Battle Royal. The Four Horsemen and the Dungeon of Doom brawled on the floor and in the crowd to start the match. The NWO stuck together and struck together, helping them make it all the way to the end. The Giant lifted Rey Mysterio Jr. up with one hand, press slamming him all the way to the floor. In the end, Lex Luger saw himself staring across the ring at the Outsiders, Six, and the Giant. Luger backdropped Hall to the floor and threw out Six. He then lifted Nash up for a torture rack. The Giant snuck up behind Luger and threw him and Nash over the top rope to win the Battle Royal. The rest of the NWO congratulated the Giant, who earned himself a future WCW World Championship match. Eric Bischoff led the NWO to the ring on the November 25th episode of Monday Nitro. Bischoff said that he asked himself, "Do I want to be consumed by the power, or do I want to be part of the Force?" He said that since he is the highest ranking official in WCW, all wrestlers have 30 days to transfer their contracts over to NWO contracts. He said, "You're either with us or against us." The American males interrupted, with Marcus Bagwell joining the NWO. Scotty Riggs was disgusted and began to walk away. Bagwell ambushed Riggs and joined his now fellow teammates. Rick Steiner made his entrance, looking into the camera and saying he thought he could trust Sting. Moments later, Sting attacked Rick Steiner from behind with a Scorpion Death Drop. The following week, the Steiner brothers called out Sting. Rick challenged Sting to a match, with Sting appearing in the crowd and nodding yes to accept the challenge. In the main event, Rick Steiner came to the ring with Scott, while Sting made his way through the crowd with a baseball bat. Sting threw down his bat and turned his back to Rick. Rick attacked Sting from behind, knocking him to the floor. Scott threw Sting back in, who miraculously hit a Scorpion Death Drop on Rick. Sting grabbed his baseball bat and handed it to Rick. Sting turned his back, and Rick got ready to strike, but Scott jumped in the way, convincing his brother to stop. Sting walked away up the aisle and pointed his bat at the broadcast booth where Eric Bischoff and the Outsiders had taken over on commentary for the second hour. Rowdy Roddy Piper opened the December 9th episode of Monday Nitro by cutting a promo in the ring. He hopped around on one leg to prove that he was healed from the NWO's attack. Piper went on to say that the most shameful thing he ever did in his career was box Mr. T with gloves that had extra padding to protect the actor. He also revealed that he was asked to take a dive that night, but said, "I don't take dives and I don't do windows." Piper said he isn't planning on taking a dive either against Hollywood Hogan at Starcade. He said that he was going to find Hogan so that they could settle their issues that night. Later, Mean Gene interviewed the Nature Boy Ric Flair at the stage. Flair introduced Piper, calling him a bona fide icon and singing his praises. Flair criticized Hogan and said he wants to see Piper win at Starcade. Piper returned the compliment and said that his match with Hogan will be his last big shot, and he's not taking this match lightly. The episode ended with Piper sitting in the ring, calling out Hogan. Instead, Eric Bischoff made his way to the ring, with the fans throwing garbage at him. Bischoff spoke with arrogance, saying that Hogan was the bigger star. He closed by calling Piper a gimp and began to walk away. Piper smacked Bischoff on the back of the head and began to rough him up. The NWO surrounded the ring, with Piper holding them back with a chair. Kevin Green ran to Piper's side to end the broadcast. The December 16th edition of Monday Nitro began with the WCW television champion Lord Steven Regal facing Psychosis in an excellent encounter. With the fans on their feet, Regal made Psychosis submit in the center of the ring to the Regal stretch. Later, Sonny Ono brought out New Japan Pro Wrestling star Masahiro Chono. However, Chono turned on Ono and revealed that he joined the NWO. A video aired depicting Chris Benoit and Woman on a romantic getaway in Paris. Benoit taunted Sullivan, asking, "What's it feel like losing the most important thing you ever had?" Sullivan was irate, marching to the ring for a bout against Arn Anderson that quickly became a wild brawl, both around ringside and in the crowd. Amongst the chaos, Anderson delivered a DDT to referee Mark Curtis. Dungeon of Doom members ran to the ring, but were no match for Anderson. Sullivan snuck up from behind and clobbered Anderson across the back with a wooden chair. Jimmy Hart woke the referee up, who made the 3 count to give Sullivan the pinfall victory. Eric Bischoff made a bold claim that Sting had joined the NWO. Coming to the ring to face Rick Steiner was the NWO Sting, who also dressed in Sting's new garb. The real Sting made his way through the crowd and confronted the NWO Sting, laying him out with a scorpion death drop right at the feet of the Steiner brothers. Hollywood Hogan led the NWO to the ring and called out Rowdy Roddy Piper, who wasn't advertised to appear that evening. Hogan ordered Vincent to go find Piper while he continued to talk trash about the Hot Rod. Vincent returned shortly after to claim that Piper had run out the back door, with Hogan calling him a coward. In the main event, The WCW World Tag Team Champions, The Outsiders, battled the Faces of Fear. Dungeon of Doom member Big Bubba Rogers hit the scene, but turned on the Faces of Fear. The rest of the Dungeon of Doom ran in, with the rest of the NWO close behind. The WCW locker room empty, leading to a huge brawl in the ring. Scott Norton attacked Ice Train, also showing his true colors and joining the NWO. Sting came to the ring to a huge ovation, but attacked the Horsemen. Rey Mysterio Jr. jumped on Sting's back, with Sting throwing him aside and walking away up the aisle. Hollywood Hogan came to the ring on the December 23rd episode of Monday Nitro, talking trash about Piper. The sound of bagpipes filled the arena, but out came Eric Bischoff, dressed in a kilt. Bischoff made a mockery of Piper, saying they could settle things right now. Referee Nick Patrick came to the ring and counted to 3 as Bischoff laid down for Hogan to cover him with 1 foot. At that, a marching band led by bagpipes played down the aisle, with Rowdy Roddy Piper making his way to the ring. Piper and Hogan brawled until the NWO held back the hot rod, allowing Hogan to get cheap shots in. Security filled the ring to save Piper as Sting looked down from the rafters. The show featured an appearance from Tombstone, formerly known to ECW fans as 911. He didn't make much of an impact though, losing to Lex Luger before disappearing into obscurity. Starcade took place on December 29th and began with WCW Cruiserweight Champion Dean Malenko battling J-Crown Champion Ultimo Dragon in an excellent encounter. The ending sequence saw multiple breathtaking near falls. In the end, Ultimo Dragon scored a pinfall victory to become the new WCW Cruiserweight Champion, bringing his belt count up to 9. Mean Gene interviewed Rowdy Roddy Piper before the bout, with Piper delivering a wild promo to hype his bout against the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hogan. A clash took place between 2 legendary cruiserweights, Jushin Thunder Liger and Rey Mysterio Jr. The quicker Mysterio frustrated Liger, who suplexed Mysterio to the floor and hit him with a stiff powerbomb. Mysterio seemed to injure his knee, with Liger honing in and further aggravating the injury. In an act of desperation, Mysterio hit a springboard moonsault onto Liger on the floor. Mysterio's reign of dominance didn't last long, as Liger grounded him with his signature Liger Bomb and scored the pinfall victory. Eddie Guerrero and Diamond Dallas Page battled in the finals of the United States Championship Tournament in a hard-fought match. Multiple near falls followed, bringing the crowd to their feet in a great showing from both performers. The Outsiders and Six came to ringside, with Hall hitting an Outsider's Edge on DDP behind the referee's back. Guerrero hit DDP with a frog splash off the top rope and scored the pinfall victory to become the new United States Champion. The Outsiders and Six attacked Guerrero following the match, and he was initially able to fend them off. But the numbers game became too much for Guerrero, and he suffered a beatdown. The Total Package Lex Luger battled the Giant, with the Giant dominating and bruising Luger. The Giant attempted a dropkick, which Luger was able to dodge. After wearing him down, Luger took down the Giant with a reverse neckbreaker. Luger made the cover, with the Giant throwing him away, knocking out the referee in the process. Despite this, Luger body slammed the Giant and signaled for a torture rack. As Luger lifted the Giant up for a rack, Nick Patrick ran in and kicked out Luger's knee. This didn't faze Luger too much, as he shoved Patrick to the mat. Sting made his way through the crowd as Luger lifted the Giant up for the rack. Syxx ran in and knocked down Luger with a spinning heel kick. Sting shoved Patrick away with his baseball bat. He dropped the bat in the center of the ring and then whispered something to both Luger and the Giant before making his exit through the crowd. Luger knocked out the Giant with the bat just as referee Mark Curtis woke up and made the 3 count. This gave Luger a huge victory. The main event of Starcade pit the WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hogan against Rowdy Roddy Piper in a non-title match. Piper received a standing ovation for his entrance, firing up the hot rod. This led to Piper going ballistic on Hogan, with the champion attempting to walk away on numerous occasions. Piper snatched the belt from his kilt and began to whip the champion. Hogan used underhanded tactics to gain the advantage and focus on bruising Piper's already injured hip. Piper literally scratched, clawed, and even bit to gain the advantage. He dodged a leg drop from Hogan with the end in sight. The referee was distracted by Hogan and an overzealous fan who hopped over the guardrail to create a commotion. Meanwhile, the Giant ran in and lifted Piper up for a chokeslam. Piper bit him on the nose, with the big man releasing his grasp. This allowed Piper to sneak up behind Hogan and slap on a sleeper hold. The champion faded, and referee Randy Anderson called for the bell to give Piper the victory via knockout. The crowd went insane, and fireworks burst above the ring as sounds of bagpipes blared through the speakers. The Outsiders rushed to the ring, with Piper charging at them, fighting them off, and causing them to retreat. The crowd chanted Roddy as Piper celebrated with his son. Meanwhile, the Giant left Hogan and walked off on his own. Hogan and the Outsiders confronted the Giant, who said that nobody watched his back while he watched theirs all the time. Hogan stuck his finger in the Giant's face and blamed him for dropping the ball. Hogan posed with his title in the ring and spit into the camera after saying that he killed Piper. A fleet of limos arrived to the December 30th edition of Monday Nitro, with the NWO pouring out. Hogan was in a good mood, singing the praises of the NWO. The Giant confronted Hogan, who again blamed him for dropping the ball. Despite this, the Giant said that because he won World War III, he wants a shot at the title. Hogan tried to pacify him, saying that as long as the title is in the family, everything is cool. But the Giant wasn't pleased, leading to DiBiase kicking the cameraman out. Ultimo Dragon defended the Cruiserweight Championship against Jushin Thunder Liger. Dragon was victorious, pinning Liger with a Dragon Suplex to retain his title. Mean Gene interviewed Diamond Dallas Page, asking him what he planned to do to the NWO. DDP calmly said, "Don't worry about it." Gene continued to press DDP, but couldn't get a straight answer. Later, Hollywood Hogan came to the ring with Eric Bischoff. Hogan said that he lost respect for Piper coming in, taking a beating, and leaving. The show closed with Rowdy Roddy Piper coming to the ring and saying that his victory over Hogan was his last fight. Hogan interrupted, with Bischoff by his side, and called Piper a liar. Piper declared himself the true icon, with Hogan riling him up. As Piper took off his shirt to fight, he was attacked by the NWO. They ganged up on Piper, delivering a brutal beatdown as fans filled the ring with garbage. The Outsiders held up Piper, with Hogan clobbering his hip with a chair. Hogan asked the Giant to chokeslam Piper, but the Giant refused. Piper was stretchered out as Hogan scolded the Giant in the ring. Hogan slapped the Giant across the face, angering the big man. The Giant continued to choke Hogan until he got the promise of a title shot. As Hogan retreated and apologized, the switch was flipped. Hogan ordered the NWO to attack the Giant, which was easier said than done. But the numbers became too much, and the Giant was rendered unconscious from the beatdown. Hogan clobbered the Giant repeatedly with his title and slapped him across the face for good measure. Would the NWO continue their reign of dominance in the new year? Find out next time as we continue our WCW arc and cover World Championship Wrestling in 1997. If you'd like to support the show, please like, share, and subscribe. You can follow us on Instagram at squared.circle.history. You can also purchase Squared Circle History and Pro Wrestling Rushmore merchandise at Pro Wrestling Tees. Thank you for listening, and keep dropping elbows.